At 4:17 a.m. on May 27, 1940, Lieutenant Jack Churchill stood on a French road near Dunkirk, watching 47 German soldiers advance toward his position from 400 yards away. 33 years old, professional soldier, zero conventional tactics. The British Expeditionary Force was evacuating. His company had orders to hold the crossroads for 90 minutes to allow the main column to retreat. Standard doctrine said, use the Bren gun. Establish defensive position. Fire and fall back. Churchill had brought a longbow and a Scottish broadsword. His commanding officer had seen the weapons during equipment inspection at Dover. Lieutenant, what the hell are those? Churchill explained. They were backup weapons for close quarters combat. The commanding officer didn't argue. Churchill had a reputation, eccentric but effective. Let him carry whatever he wanted as long as he completed his missions. The German column was closing. 350 yards. Churchill's section had 14 men, 1 Bren gun, assorted rifles. Against 47 Germans with machine gun support, poor odds for a conventional firefight. The Germans knew it. They were advancing confidently in loose formation. No concern about British resistance. Churchill drew an arrow from his quiver. Bodkin point. Steel shaft. 32 inches long. He'd made the arrows himself during the winter of 1939 at his family estate in Surrey. The longbow was yew wood, 6 feet tall, 80-pound draw weight. Effective range approximately 250 yards in skilled hands. His sergeant, William Ryder, watched him nock the arrow. Sir, permission to speak freely, Churchill nodded. What the bloody hell are you doing? Churchill sighted down the shaft toward the German column. Establishing proper battlefield etiquette, Sergeant. Wars should have style. At 300 yards, Churchill drew the bow to full extension. The yew bent. His right hand anchored at his cheek. Front sight picture through both eyes. Target the German officer leading the column. The man was carrying binoculars and walking ahead of his troops. Leadership target, high value. Churchill released. The arrow arched through the morning air for 2.3 seconds. The German officer dropped. The arrow had struck him in the left side of his chest. He fell forward and didn't move. The German column stopped. Soldiers scattered, looking for cover. They'd heard no gunshot. Didn't understand what had killed their officer. Chemical weapon, maybe. Silent artillery. Some kind of British trick. Churchill knocked another arrow. Selected his next target. Squad leader, right flank. Drew, released. The arrow covered 280 yards. Hit the squad leader in the shoulder. He spun and fell. Now the Germans spotted Churchill, a British officer standing fully exposed on a road, holding a medieval weapon. It made no tactical sense. Must be bait. The real British force was probably positioned in ambush nearby. The Germans took cover behind a stone wall and waited. Churchill and his 14 men held that crossroads for 93 minutes using rifles, 1 Bren gun, and 2 longbow arrows. The German column never pressed their numerical advantage. They believed they were facing a larger force. When Churchill's section finally withdrew toward Dunkirk, the Germans let them go. If you want to see how this British officer used medieval weapons to fight World War II, please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the war. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Churchill. John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill was born the 16th of December, 1906 in Hong Kong. His father was a British civil servant. His mother was a homemaker who believed proper gentlemen should know classical martial skills. She hired tutors to teach young Jack archery, fencing, and bagpipe playing. He excelled at all three. At age 10, Churchill could hit man-sized targets at 100 yards with a longbow. At 15, he won the Sandhurst Archery Championship. At 18, he represented Britain in archery competitions across Europe. He never won international championships. His shooting was technically perfect, but lacked competitive aggression. Judges noted he seemed more interested in style than scores. Churchill graduated from Royal Military College Sandhurst in 1926. He was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Manchester Regiment. Standard colonial posting followed. Burma, India, Ceylon. He spent 10 years doing garrison duty in places where nothing happened. The peacetime army bored him. In 1936, Churchill resigned his commission. He'd saved enough money to pursue other interests. He moved to London and worked as a newspaper editor and male model. The modeling was surprisingly lucrative. Churchill had the classical British officer look: square jaw, neat mustache, confident posture. He appeared in advertisements for pipe tobacco and men's clothing. He also acted in small film roles. Nothing major. Background military characters, officers at formal dinners. The work paid adequately but didn't satisfy him. Churchill needed something more. Adventure, challenge, purpose. He found archery competitions. Between 1937 and 1939, Churchill competed in tournaments across Britain and Europe. He represented Britain at the World Archery Championships in Oslo in 1939. His performance was respectable but unremarkable. He placed 17th overall. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, Churchill immediately rejoined the British Army. His previous commission was reactivated. He was assigned to the Manchester Regiment with the rank of lieutenant. Finally, a war. Finally, something interesting. Churchill reported for duty carrying his longbow, his broadsword, and his bagpipes. His commanding officer examined the equipment and asked if Churchill understood they were fighting with modern weapons. Churchill said he understood perfectly. The modern weapons would handle most situations. The medieval weapons were for special circumstances. The British Expeditionary Force deployed to France in October 1939. Churchill's battalion took up positions along the Belgian border. The winter of 1939 to 1940 was the Phony War. Both sides dug in. No major operations, occasional patrols, lots of waiting. Churchill practiced archery during the waiting. He'd pace off distances in the French countryside, mark targets, shoot from various ranges and angles. His fellow officers thought he was insane. His men thought he was entertaining. Nobody stopped him. On May 10, 1940, Germany launched Fall Gelb, the invasion of France and the Low Countries. Blitzkrieg. The Phony War ended. Churchill's battalion was ordered to defensive positions near the French-Belgian border. They would delay German advance. Buy time for the main British force to evacuate through Dunkirk. That is when Churchill got his first opportunity to use his bow in combat. The incident at the crossroads near Dunkirk on May 27th. 2 German casualties from longbow fire. The German column delayed for 93 minutes. His commanding officer demanded an explanation after they reached Dunkirk. Churchill said he'd used the bow because rifles attracted too much attention. A longbow was silent. The Germans didn't understand what was happening. Confusion was a tactical advantage. The commanding officer couldn't argue with results. Churchill's section had held the crossroads longer than expected with 0 British casualties. If medieval weapons accomplished the mission, then medieval weapons were acceptable. Churchill evacuated from Dunkirk on the 2nd of June, 1940. He returned to England with his longbow, his broadsword, and a new reputation. Mad Jack, the officer who brought arrows to a gunfight. The British Army needed officers with unconventional thinking. Churchill was reassigned to the Commandos, the newly formed Special Operations Units designed for raids against German-occupied Europe. Small unit tactics, independent operations. Perfect for someone who didn't follow standard doctrine. Churchill joined No. 3 Commando in July 1940. He immediately established his personal combat protocol. He would lead every raid carrying his broadsword on his belt and his bow across his back. His men could carry whatever weapons they preferred. Churchill would carry what worked for him. His first commando raid was Operation Archery, the 27th of December, 1941. Target: German garrison at Vågsøy, Norway. The mission was to destroy fish oil factories, engage German forces, and gather intelligence. Churchill led the assault on Mole Island. The landing craft approached the beach at 08:48 hours. German sentries spotted them at 200 yards. Churchill stood in the bow of the landing craft and began playing the March of the Cameron Men on his bagpipes. His men thought the German gunfire had driven him insane. Churchill said later he was establishing proper battlefield atmosphere. Raids should have appropriate music. The landing craft hit the beach. Churchill jumped out, still playing bagpipes, and led his men up the shore. German machine gun fire kicked up sand around them. Churchill played louder. His men followed him because running toward a mad bagpiper seemed marginally safer than staying on an exposed beach. At the German machine gun nest, Churchill stopped playing. He drew his broadsword and charged the position. The German crew was so surprised by a screaming British officer with a medieval sword that they hesitated. Churchill killed the machine gunner with the sword. His men shot the other 2 crew members. The raid successfully destroyed the fish oil factories and killed approximately 150 German soldiers. British casualties were 19 dead. Churchill's section had 0 casualties. His men credited his aggressive leadership. Churchill credited proper musical accompaniment. After Vogue say, Churchill was promoted to captain and given command of No. 2 Commando. He implemented his personal standards across the unit. Every officer would learn basic swordsmanship. Every raid would begin with bagpipe music. Unconventional tactics would be encouraged. On the 14th of July, 1943, Churchill led a raid in Sicily. Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily. Churchill's commandos were tasked with capturing the town of Pigoletti and the surrounding high ground. Intelligence estimated 200 German defenders. Churchill had 50 commandos. The approach to Pigoletti required crossing 600 yards of open terrain. Standard tactics said, wait for artillery support or approach under cover of darkness. Churchill decided to walk directly toward the town at 3 o'clock in the afternoon carrying his broadsword and playing Will Ye No Come Back Again on his bagpipes. His second-in-command asked if this was wise. Churchill said it was psychologically devastating. Germans expected sneaking and shooting. They didn't expect bagpipes and swords. Confusion created opportunities. Churchill walked toward Pigoletti alone. His men followed 100 yards behind, ready to provide covering fire. German sentries watched through binoculars. They radioed their command post. British officer approaching. Alone. Playing musical instrument. Possibly insane. Request instructions. The German command post didn't know what to make of the report. One officer approaching alone was unusual. Playing music was bizarre. It had to be some kind of trick. They ordered their troops to hold fire and observe. Churchill reached the outskirts of Pigoletti. He stopped playing bagpipes, drew his broadsword, then did something that shocked both his own men and the German defenders. He dropped the sword on the ground, stood completely unarmed, and waved at the German positions. The German defenders were confused. This was clearly bait. The British officer was trying to draw fire to reveal German positions. Standard reconnaissance tactic. The Germans held fire. Churchill stood there for 90 seconds. Then he picked up his sword, turned around, and walked back toward his men. The Germans still didn't fire. They were waiting for the real attack. The attack with artillery and infantry. The officer with the bagpipes was a diversion. When Churchill rejoined his commandos, he ordered them to fix bayonets and prepare to assault. His plan was simple. The Germans were confused and hesitant. They wouldn't be expecting an immediate frontal assault. Confusion plus aggression equals victory. At 15:20 hours, Churchill led 50 commandos in a direct charge across 600 yards of open ground toward Pigoletti. He was in front, carrying his broadsword, screaming Highland war cries. His men followed because, by this point, following Mad Jack had become normal. The German defenders opened fire at 400 yards. Churchill and his commandos kept running. At 200 yards, German fire intensified. 3 commandos fell wounded. The rest kept charging. At 50 yards, Churchill threw a grenade toward the nearest German position. Then he jumped into their trench and started swinging his broadsword. The Germans retreated, not because the sword was particularly effective against rifles, but because fighting a screaming British officer with a medieval weapon was psychologically overwhelming. Churchill's commandos captured Pigoletti with 42 German prisoners and minimal British casualties. The German commanders surrendered personally to Churchill. He asked why Churchill had dropped his weapon earlier. Churchill explained it was psychological warfare. Make the enemy think you are crazy. Crazy people are unpredictable. Unpredictable enemies are dangerous. The German commander said that was the most insane tactic he'd ever witnessed. Churchill took it as a compliment. Churchill continued leading commando raids through 1943. His reputation grew. Mad Jack became a legend. Stories spread through both Allied and German ranks. The British officer who fought with medieval weapons, who played bagpipes during combat, who dropped his weapons to confuse enemies. On May 15, 1944, Churchill led a raid in Yugoslavia. His commandos were supporting partisan operations against German forces near the island of Bren. Churchill's unit was ambushed by German infantry, outnumbered approximately 3-1. Standard procedure was immediate withdrawal. Churchill ordered his men to retreat while he provided covering fire. He positioned himself behind a stone wall with his rifle and fought a delaying action. He held the position for 17 minutes, killed an estimated 23 German soldiers, allowed his men to escape. Then his ammunition ran out. Churchill could have retreated. The Germans were 100 yards away. He could have escaped into the nearby forest. Instead, he drew his broadsword and prepared to charge. Before he could move, German mortar fire hit his position. The explosion knocked him unconscious. When he woke up, German soldiers were standing over him. He was captured. Churchill spent the next year in German prisoner of war camps. First, at Sachsenhausen concentration camp. Then, at a camp in Austria. He attempted escape 5 times. Each attempt failed. The Germans considered him too dangerous to execute and too valuable as a propaganda prisoner. A British officer who fought with medieval weapons was interesting for morale purposes. In April 1945, Churchill finally succeeded in escaping. He walked 150 miles through German lines back to Allied territory. He reported to American forces in northern Italy, demanded to be sent back to combat immediately. The Americans explained the war in Europe had ended 3 weeks ago. Germany had surrendered on May 8th. Churchill was disappointed. He'd missed the end of the war. He was reassigned to Burma. Japan was still fighting. Churchill could get more combat experience there. But before he arrived in theater, Japan surrendered on the 15th of August, 1945. Churchill never fought in the Pacific. After the war, Churchill remained in the British Army. He served in various garrison postings. Nothing exciting, no more commando raids, no opportunities to use broadswords or bagpipes in combat. He retired from active service in 1959 with the rank of lieutenant colonel. He'd served 33 years, fought in World War II across 3 theaters, led dozens of commando raids, carried a longbow and broadsword through the entire war. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every day. Stories about soldiers who fought wars their own way and survived to tell about it. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You are not just a viewer. You are part of keeping these memories alive.